everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Victoria Hendrickson. I'm a partner and vice president on the consulting side here at OV, and I'm so excited to bring Sertrice Shipley from Plan to Action to talk about sponsorship today. I'd like to start by introducing Sertrice. Sertrice Shipley is the CEO and founder of Plan to Action. Plan to Action is a culture and inclusion consulting firm, and Sertrice is the co-author of Inclusiolytics: How Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leaders Use Data to Drive Their Work. Prior to leading Plan to Action, she made significant contributions as the co-owner and chief consulting officer of Mattingly Solutions. Her dynamic consulting has benefited clients like the National Association of Women Business Owners, Coppers, and American Humane, delivering comprehensive culture solutions ranging from strategic planning to employee listening assessment to learning and development. A respected DEI thought leader and public speaker, Sertrice has been invited to speak at prominent events like the Society for Human Resource Management, the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, and various chamber events across the United States. Beyond her professional endeavors, she's deeply committed to community service and sits on various boards. And Sertrice is located in Raleigh, North Carolina, with her husband Abraham and her dog Winston. So Treese has a super impressive background, and I want to note that prior to specializing in this kind of work with inclusion, we at OV were lucky enough to have Sertrice on board and call her a colleague for a number of years. So I can personally vouch for Sertrice and tell you all that she's such an impactful leader to work with, and these days I'm lucky to call her a friend. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive in to some content, and I hope you all learn from Sertrice as much as I do. So to get us started, Sertrice, we all know you for your work in inclusion, but today we're here to talk about mentorship and sponsorship. So tell us more about what inclusion means in your work and how you distinguish it from diversity or equity, and maybe how that connects to sponsorship.
Yeah. I think it's so important to talk about these words and how they're different. I think especially the past several years, right? We've just used the term DEI, and people talk about that like it's one thing when it encompasses so much. I think that's our part of what also makes it kind of scary and intimidating to people is they start pulling in all of these meanings to this one, mysterious term. So with that, the researcher in me, I can't help myself. Let's get some construct clarity, right? So diversity is simply a group level statistic, right? It is a measure of difference within a group. So we are talking hard numbers. It just exists or it doesn't, and it can exist in varying ways. It's not talking about any one identity. And that's really important to remember, right? It's about a mix of things in a group. And then when we think about equity, it is what is an organization doing to support each of its employees' ability to thrive, right? So this is going to be your policies, practices, procedures, and how it impacts different people in those different identity groups. And then the last piece, though, is inclusion. So if equity is what an organization is doing, inclusion is what is each person in that organization doing. Inclusion is a behavior, it's a verb. It's what we do. So it's how we treat each other. It could be me and you, Victoria, right? How am I treating you when we interact? Or it could be me to a group. How am I treating our 12 attendees in the room, right? Am I supporting them and making them feel like they can be a part and checking chat and things like that? But it still comes back to Sertrice. What am I doing? Right. And the point when we start pulling all these things together, you have diversity. So you have a mix of people in the room. You have equity, an organization putting forth policies, practices, procedures to support everyone. And then you have inclusion, each person putting in the effort to treat each other well will lead to higher feelings of belonging. And that's feeling valued, respected, seen, and heard. And that's our outcome variable. That's our goal whenever you hear people talk about this mysterious DEI. Really, it brings down to we want all of our employees to thrive. We want them to feel valued, respected, seen, and heard. It benefits the individual employee and the organization. And that's why it's something that's important and should be thought about.
That's really helpful. I know, these days people are wondering what the words really mean. So I appreciate you bringing it down to the construct and behavioral level of what does this actually look like? What are we trying to make happen here?
Yeah, less scary and definitely legal, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I know today we want to focus on sponsorship. What is sponsorship and how do you differentiate that from mentorship?
Yeah, and so this is part of why I like to start with the construct clarity piece because when we think about mentorship and sponsorship at a high level, having the program could tie into equity for sure. But at an individual level, this is a great example of an inclusive behavior, right? Because I said, oh, inclusion's a behavior, it's what we do. What can
Mhm.
that look like? So inclusion can be one-on-one or it can be one to a group. It's great to start one on one though, because each person has different needs. So if you get to know an individual personally, you will better be able to support them. And then inclusive behaviors can also be ongoing or in the moment, right? And so mentorship and sponsorship are great examples of ongoing forms of allyship, ongoing inclusive behaviors that can support someone. And when you're a mentor or sponsor, again, those are more specifically their ally actions. So you have access to power in some way that this other person doesn't have. And you can use that power to support them, right? And so with mentorship, this is what we see a lot of. So many organizations have an internal mentorship program. It was funny listening to you read my bio. I forgot I sent it. I was like, man, why is there so much in there? But I volunteer a lot, and pretty much every organization I volunteer for has a mentorship program, right? It's everywhere, and it's very well understood of supporting people so they can succeed. And what you'll find with mentorship is the onus of the relationship is really on the mentee to come forward and say, I want to develop, here's the areas I want to develop in, what do I need? A mentor will say, hey, here's some general advice, but it's up to you to take it and apply it, right? So it's really driven on that mentee side and it's focused on personal and professional growth and skill development, right? And so with that, when we think about sponsorship, the key difference is that the person already has skills, right? So I'm going to refer to them as a protege, equivalent to a mentee. So that protege, they're like, no, I already have skills, I have talent. I'm just not getting access to opportunity and I need support figuring out why I'm missing that or how do I get in the right rooms and the right conversations. And so a sponsor, they are there to advocate for their protege. They are there to get them into those rooms and those conversations to amplify the work that they're doing. And where mentorship, it really relies on the mentee to drive, it's actually the opposite for sponsorship.
Mhm.
It's really on the sponsor. The protege is going to come forward and say, hey, here's my skills, here's my value add, here's where I'm trying to go. Help me get in those rooms. Now the sponsor has an assignment to go out and make it happen. So we see that difference in what the focus is and how the time is spent. Um, yeah, no, I'm a pause there. That was a lot.
No, that's great. So it sounds like, I mean, both are good, and there's a role for both, but
Yes.
sponsorship is maybe a little more goal directed of, we have something we're trying to achieve. There might be barriers, and so the sponsor can really help the protege move forward.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a survey item we ask for innovation, which is the best ideas get notice and sponsorship to move them forward. So it's like the idea is already there, but are we getting the sponsorship to get it in front of the right people, to get resources? And that's where that really key sponsor to advocate comes in.
Yeah, and you're spot on that both have a role because I feel like that's something when you start to compare things, people think one is better than the other. That's not the case at
Yeah.
all. They both have a need. There are times where people need mentorship. They are earlier on in need in whatever space they're in and need some direction and guidance. But then other times, no, they've already been there and they're
Mhm.
frustrated, right? So they need that extra support. One other thing I'll note here, the difference between the two is that when it comes to the mentor, you'll notice I didn't necessarily say they have to be in a specific role or tenure or age or anything. It's just that they have more experience and so they can give that advice needed and the skill development and so on. The sponsor, though, they actually do need to
Mhm.
have be at a certain level in an organization, a certain amount of tenure, because they need to have the power internally to be able to provide that sponsorship and support where their word actually carries some weight.
Mhm. Okay. That takes me to my next question, which is what is the role of a sponsor? We've talked a little bit about that, but then what is the role of the protege as well?
Yeah, great question. And so with Let's start with the protege side because I feel like sometimes we forget that, right? They in these ally relationships, a protege, it's important for them to understand their strengths, to know, what is their specific value add, what are their goals. They also from a functional standpoint, right? They shouldn't be on a PIP. They shouldn't be on a performance improvement plan. They got to already be excelling in their role. They should have put some thought into their career progression and where they want to go. And they have to have a bias for action. So once they get the opportunities, they have to be prepared to show up and support. Whereas on the sponsor side, their role, again, it's providing that guidance. And so they need to, one, it'd be helpful if they had some kind of training on how do we support others, right? Maybe some coaching type training or inclusive leadership, whatever you might already have as far as a leader program, making sure they go through that. And then again, it's very important that they have a certain amount of tenure in the organization and be at a certain level. Depending on the organization, it might be director and above, or it might be VP and above, but you want them to be able to support them and advocate in the right conversations.
Mhm. So we had a really great question come through, which has to do with kind of starting the sponsorship relationship. So say someone comes to you and asks, will you sponsor me? But you don't know them very well. How do you go about that since you would be putting your reputation on the line? You are, putting yourself out there. What's the first
Yeah.
step?
That is a good question. And actually, can we go to I know we had one more slide. Can we talk on this point first, and then I'll dig into that because I think I can tie it in pretty well.
Totally.
Awesome.
So,
Because I think what I talked about so far was, the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And I noted that a lot of organizations will have a formal mentorship program, but often not formal sponsorship. Either they
mhm,
don't understand there's a difference, or what I hear a lot of is people think, well, sponsorship will just happen naturally. Or maybe it is a part of mentorship, so it'll just occur. And research has found that that actually doesn't happen, especially when we look at things like gender, for example. Tend to receive sponsorship, whereas women tend to receive mentorship. So they get
mhm,
over mentored and under sponsored. And so that's why it is important to think of them as two separate constructs and to address them through different programs. And so when building these programs, a few things to consider, and I'll just run through the slide, but then I have other stuff, is to first assess your organization's readiness. What have you done so far? Are your leaders prepared to support in this way? Um, is it, do you have a current succession plan that this can tie into that it makes sense? Are you a big enough organization where having sponsorship makes sense? Once you run through those different areas, you can then identify some leaders to serve as potential sponsors, recommend doing a pilot program, right? So who could be good to test this out with? Build out your program, so develop some clear guidelines and have some trainings in place for both sponsors and proteges, and then have your pilot program measure if it's been successful. And at the end here, institutionalize sponsorship as a core leadership responsibility. And this is why that last piece is why I wanted to touch on this before digging
mhm,
into the question that had come up, where sponsorship is also very helpful. Having a formal sponsorship program can be very helpful in helping you also diversify your leadership as you move up because often you're underrepresented groups. That's why they're called underrepresented, right? They're being missed. And so this could help you tap into your overlooked talent. And if we leave it to people we only have relationships with, well, that's already happening, right? And so that's where it can be a problem. And to help with that awkwardness, right, of someone who comes to you and you don't know them well, having a formal program in place can help you prevent that, right? Because you start explaining to all of your leaders, hey, this is an expectation. We're going to have we want our leaders to support our talent. Those who have the drive to move forward, we want to make sure we're tapping into that. And so there's that expectation there that you're already going to be willing to support them, right? And then there's a thorough matching process that we recommend. I actually am working on a book chapter right now where I've dug into this. So between that and I have a service, so that's where I keep referring to. But definitely through interviewing a lot of people who've done this and researching best practice, having a mutual and sorority life, if anybody was in fraternity sororities, doing mutual pairings. So having your proteges fill out an application where they talk about where they want to go, what their strengths are, the areas of the organization they're in, and then having your sponsors also be able to say, hey, here are the areas I'm really good at and think I could have connections. And then having someone do those pairings in that way will help you get to a point where, yes, you maybe don't have that personal relationship yet, but you both are aligned in the direction you want to go. And then the other thing we recommend is when you do a program, having, if possible, twice as many sponsors as you do proteges. Because once you do those pairings, if for some reason they realize we're really not meshing, you have
Mhm.
a replacement who can step in. Or sometimes you have a leader leave the organization. You have someone who can step in. So all this to say, it's not going to be perfect, right? And starting that part, the sponsorship relationship will be about relationship building and building connections, but you have some time to grow into that, and that's okay. Take that time and space and own it that you're all going through this process together. The last thing I'll say too, actually, in that space in the pairings, is making sure to avoid the perception of favoritism, not to have the sponsor be in the same reporting line. Making
Mm,
sure that it's related though, right? They're not completely in
right.
some other area of the organization where again they don't have the access to advocate for their protege. But again, we don't want that conflict of interest. So hopefully that's helpful to the question there that was asked.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, we have several coming in.
Yeah, yeah.
So related, what is the most common reason that sponsorship relationships fail?
Ooh, great question. So, as I said, the biggest difference, one of the biggest differences between mentorship and sponsorship is that it is driven by the sponsor, right? And
Mhm.
then I proceeded to say it should be your very top leaders. How many of your top leaders are just sitting around twiddling their thumbs saying, we got time for anything? So, again, in conversations with people who have done this formally, that tends to be the biggest barrier, actually, even more so than them relating to each other. It's just the time commitment and making sure that your sponsors actually show up and do the work of a sponsor. When they don't, then it's, like other programs where we just put them in there and they're by name, but no action's really happening. So trying
Mhm.
to create some, being really clear on the expectations of involvement up front in the program really helps lead to success, and being realistic with yourself, right? Don't make it a requirement that they're meeting once a week when you know
Right.
realistically that can't happen. So, what are the expectations?
Okay. We've had a couple of questions around sort of time frames. So both, and these might be things you can answer together of
Yeah.
what is the typical sort of lifespan of a sponsorship relationship and what's a realistic time frame for seeing results?
Ooh, both great questions. Okay, so time frame. What I found was 12 months on average. So taking full through a full year. Sometimes it was 18 months that I saw as well, and that's at least for the formal program. Now
Hmm.
afterward, there's nothing to say that relationship won't continue informally, right? Now we've established it, and maybe that informal sponsorship can continue on. But as far as the formal program, 1 year, and as far as impact, it depends, right? As a psychologist, we love that response. But it really can depend. It depends on the individual, and it depends on the organization and how quickly things move and the different opportunities. So, some of the impact measures that we recommend
Hmm.
is one, it can be as simple as intent to stay, right? Your retention. So just asking people in the program compared to others, and this can be in your normal. I know we did it a lot in OV surveys. I will be here in a year, and just having a question in there of did they go in this program or not as a demographic, you could then start to see, hey, is there a change over time? So that's something really simple. Um, and also just asking them their perspective. So you may be able to see an individual impact as soon as the
Hmm.
program's over based on how we do a pre, mid, and post survey. So based on how those
Sure.
things change. But then outside of that, some more concrete things, again, immediately after the program's over, you can say, did people get access to special projects? Did they get included in a special program after going through this one? Did they get promoted? Did they have any lateral moves? So being able to go through, again, tie this as closely to your succession plan as possible, but the
Mhm.
specific timing is going to vary by company because some organizations move a lot slower. So realistically, they
Yeah.
couldn't see that for a year and a half before an impact, or it might be a month later.
Yeah, I imagine it has to do with the protege's goals. Are you trying to move a new product forward? Do you want to get promoted? Like it depends how long that thing takes, and that's so individual. Um, so that makes sense and would probably make it a little harder to study in that way.
Yeah.
But there was a question about any data you can share about the impact of sponsorship programs.
Great question. Great question. So, there actually isn't a ton of research out there. That's part of why I'm contributing this book chapter to a colleague who's working on a textbook right now, because there aren't a lot of resources. Especially if you look up the concept of sponsorship and allyship together, there is one popular book called The Sponsor Effect, that's several years old, and it's large. It focuses a lot on especially women. That's the other thing, is a lot of the research or conversation so far tends to be focused on gender,
Mm.
and how women need sponsorship, but can impact really anyone.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, short answer is not a ton of research. Hopefully over time, I might be able to contribute to that a little bit more if I get to support in some more ways. So I'll get back to you.
We'll look out for research you're putting out there.
Yeah.
And then related, there was a question if you can estimate the amount of Fortune 500 companies that are using sponsorship programs. Do you have a sense from your work in this space?
It's really hard to say,
Yeah.
honestly, because not once you get into bigger companies, they like to hide a lot of what they do, right? And so getting the responses, I will say I do think there are some. I've had, but not many. I do think the number is small. What I'll also say is something you might have realized is this can be similar to a well-run high potential program, right?
Mm,
But not
sure.
all hypo programs are created the same, right? Some are literally we just flag someone, it's a secret, they don't know, so they don't get to be involved. We don't really have a lot of process on the background or back end to do anything with them. We're just tagging it, and in theory they'll get more access, or we just want to see how they
Mhm.
move forward. But in some, there could be overlap, right? A really well run program, if they are involved, if it's not a secret, if and so all this to say that it gets a little messy too, counting sponsorship programs, because there may be a program that's similar but not necessarily called this as well. And I did
Yeah.
see a few of
So
those.
it's hard to identify if they're calling it different things. Yeah.
Yes, and sometimes they
Um,
encompass it in their mentorship programs, and so they
mm,
do add on in their mentor program is like a part A, part B, and so yeah, the lines are definitely blurry. It's hard to give it a hard number.
okay. That makes sense. Before we move on from this slide, anything else you would want to cover about benefits or challenges folks on the phone might want to consider
Yeah.
when thinking about a sponsorship program?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned one benefit being, it could help with diversifying your leadership as you move up. If you start tapping into some unrecognized talent, it also can. One of the biggest things that came to mind is, as you mentioned, used to work with OV. I still collect employee listening data in a lot of my DEI work. And whenever we ask the question, I'm satisfied with my career growth opportunities, it tends to be low, right? It tends to be one of the drivers for engagement. And often there are questions of what do we do, right? How do we show them we care? And having programs like this one can really help just improve your employee experience, because they are like, okay,
Mhm.
they have this program. I said I care about career growth. Now they're creating space for me to do this, right? And leadership is driving it. It's not just my responsibility. So it can help with that overall employee perception of how you view their career growth and career development in an organization. So I think that's one of the main potentially overlooked benefits of a sponsorship program, is just the face validity with your employees. And then yeah, so face validity, access to talent, moving up, and also just improving culture as well, right? Because you're now
Mhm.
creating space for more relationships to be built.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
then
So from
challenges,
here,
I
I'll
think the
go.
biggest challenge was just the time thing. I'll leave it there.
I think we all know leaders don't have a ton of time. They mean well, but there is not a ton of time. So yeah, that's a hard one to overcome for sure. So I like the suggestion of having two sponsors for every protege because time is
Yes.
real. Okay, so from here, I'd like to move into more Q&A. I know we've been answering some throughout. In fact, we already have a couple in the queue here. So I'll go ahead and start reading those off. But this is the invitation for any more questions y'all have been holding on to. Please go ahead and put them in that Q&A. First one has to do with matching a sponsor to protege. Is there any benefit to matching the sponsor to protege based on characteristics like gender, ethnicity, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, again, there's not a lot of hard research. So this is just me kind of based on other experiences in similar spaces to say, possibly, but not necessarily. What I would recommend is to put it in the application of, are you more comfortable with
Mm,
someone who matches your identity? Because sometimes that might be a personal preference, and that alone could change how that person experiences the partnership. But if they're like, nope, I'm just here for whoever's going to help me, what matters more is their access to um, opportunity and how they can get them involved.
hmm. That makes sense. And it may probably, depending on what that protege is hoping to get out of that relationship. And
Yeah. And sometimes
yeah,
it's not possible, right? Again, if we're
right.
talking about connecting to high leaders, we know a lot of organizations don't have that much diversity as you move up.
Mm,
So limiting it in that way could actually be really restricting to who then could take part in that program. So I wouldn't make it a, mandatory requirement by any means, of course.
that's a great point. Okay, the last question might be a big one. And
Yeah.
it's, are you feeling any political pressures regarding sponsorship programs?
This is a good one. So previously, mentorship and sponsorship programs were often connected to employee resource groups. And
Hmm.
so it was identity specific. And again, great potential way to help with diversity. But now, just the current political environment, having anything tied to identity is really dangerous and sets you up for legal problems. So my recommendation is do not have identity be a requirement in any way and don't limit participation in any way tied to identity. You can still, as I said, limit it to maybe they need to go through another program first or they have to not be on a PIP, they're at a certain level. Those kinds of things, fine. But just don't, say this is our women development program because that could set you up for some issues.
Yeah.
But other than that, no real political pressure because this and this is part of why I touched on what I did in the beginning, defining what DEI is. None of the true work is illegal. Even if you dig deep into the executive orders, and yes, they're kind of gray on purpose, but it really, the heart of the work, looking at your numbers to know who's there for diversity, fine. Having research based best practices for your policies, practices, and procedures, fine. Wanting to do learning and development to teach people how to respect each other, fine. Right? The having programs where to help our develop our employees so they can thrive, fine. All of the work is still legal. It's just the only thing that's really under a microscope is identity specific, which wasn't really a recommendation in the first place, but did pop up sometimes like this, where maybe a
Yeah.
scholarship or a program tied to trying to support a certain group. And so that's one thing that's changed, but outside of that, it's still possible.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
And somehow we are already at time. Thank you for this, Sertrice. It's been so valuable. And just from the amount of questions we've had throughout, I think the audience is finding a lot of value through this as well. If you want to contact Sertrice, her contact information is here. I encourage you to reach out to her if you're interested in implementing anything like this. And then just a quick reminder that our next webinar will be with Dr. Gina Cox about leading with respect, building inclusive cultures for everyone. So if this was of interest to you, this next one will likely be as well. So hope to see you all there. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.